Alright, Cinzia, here we go. Here's my next video addressing your fourth question. So, your fourth question reads, the Crown attempted to take credit for the discoveries of Columbus while also attempting to cancel the rights and privileges granted to Columbus. Period. Okay, that's not a question. But you do continue. You say, can you explain for us the real motives behind this about face? All right, so the statement portion of this is just wrong. I don't know where that you're getting this information from. So the Crown did not attempt to take credit for the discoveries of Columbus, and it did not attempt to cancel the rights and privileges granted to Columbus. This is just nonsense. I don't know where you're getting this information from. I mean, your questions, they're either asked in a biased way or they frame the situation in a biased or incorrect way. And this is just wrong. I mean, this information is just wrong. So I don't even know where to begin with this. So the Crown did not attempt to take credit for the discoveries of Columbus. That's the first part of your incorrect statement. I mean, you know, this all took place in a medieval paradigm. So in a sense, I guess, the discoveries of Columbus, I can't even say they would be attributed to the Crown. Like, everybody understood, Christopher Columbus was the one who did the sailing. He was the one who did the finding of the islands. He was the one who did the communication of his discovery to the rest of the world. He's the one appointed governor by the Crown, and so, you know, not really something he wanted. He was the one who did the governance of the New World for 8 years, not really wanting to do it. The Crown never disputed any of that. They never said we did that. King Ferdinand didn't say, "No, that wasn't Columbus on the Nina Pinta and the Santa Maria. That was me." You know, Queen Isabella never said, "No, that's not Columbus sitting over there in Hispaniola ruling over the Hidalgos. That's me." No, I don't even understand that part of your statement. The Crown attempted to take credit for the discoveries of Columbus. In what sense? You know what? Don't answer that. In no sense. Okay, so that's just nonsense. The other part of your incorrect statement is they attempted to cancel the rights and privileges granted to Columbus. No, they didn't do that. So I explained in earlier videos, the Hidalgos were, maybe I need to explain who the Hidalgos were a little bit more. So I've referred to the Hidalgos in past videos as the low-landed nobles of the Spanish feudal system. You know, in England they had like barons. Okay, so you might know that term, barons. That's what Hidalgos were. They were like land barons. So in a feudal paradigm, you need a lord and a vassal, and sometimes the vassals even have vassals, and those vassals have vassals. So you know the king has princes who are his vassals, and the princes have dukes, counts, earls who are his vassals, and they have barons who are their vassals, and they have knights who are their vassals, and the knights have peasants who are their, you know, it goes all the way down, you know. So in that paradigm, there is each title has privileges. So the rights and privileges granted to Columbus were when he found the West Indies, and he reported back to the Spanish Crown and said, "You're not going to believe what I found." They said, "Great, we need somebody over there. We'd like to put some settlements over there. We'd like to send some Spaniards over there, and we're going to need somebody to govern them. And so that'll be you. You can be the governor." And he was like, "Well, I don't really want that, but you know." He knew his place. He was sailing in the service of the Crown. He wasn't going to, you know, he back-talked the King and Queen of Spain a lot. So he had to kind of pick his battles. So he said, all right. And also, the title that he was being granted, Governor of the West Indies, that was a hereditary title. So, you know, even if he grinned and bore it for 8 years or however many years they wanted him to do it, he could then retire and pass that title on to his son, and the son could pass it on to his son, and so on and so forth down the Columbus line. And that would be a great thing, because that would be a step up into noble society for the son of a weaver. And that's like as good as you could do in the medieval paradigm. It's rare that you could go from non-noble into noble society. That here in the modern age, in great capitalist societies, you can start out as a pauper, and if you work hard enough, you can earn your fortune, and you could be a wealthy person. That wasn't the case in the medieval paradigm. You were born a certain station, and you stayed that station all of your life, with rare exceptions. So one of these rare exceptions is, if you do something as marvelous as Columbus had done, you might be granted the rights and privileges of a noble. Even if you weren't a blue blood, you might still get a title like governor or something like that. So he earned that. And the other way, the other way that you could rise in station in the medieval paradigm, and this goes to who the hidalgos were. This brings me back to my original point. Who are the hidalgos? The hidalgo, there were two types of hidalgos, two types of low landed gentry in the Spanish feudal system. There was the traditional type, which was blue bloods, people who were born into noble families, people who were born the sons of hidalgos. Christopher Columbus's first wife, well, it may have been his only wife. We don't know if he ever formally married the second wife. He may have. He may have had a common law marriage. It may have been actually an on-the-books marriage. We don't know. But his first wife, who died in childbirth, she was a noblewoman. She was of Italian descent. Beatrice, her name was. But she lived in Portugal, so she was like, how like there are Italian Americans, people of Italian descent who live in America. Well, back then there were Italian Portuguese, people of Italian descent, and they lived in Portugal, and that's what she was. So when he went over to Portugal, he met her, and they got married, and she was a noble woman. She was of blue blood birth. He was not. He was the son of a weaver. So he kind of married into that fortune, but he lost it all when she died. He actually went bankrupt trying to give her a funeral befitting of a noblewoman, and then he had nothing left. So he probably even still had debts and everything. So that might have contributed to why he agreed to the governorship. But anyway, I have to get back to who are the hidalgos. So the one type would be that type, the blue bloods. But there was another type of hidalgo. So in the Spanish feudal system, if you're going to create settlements, you needed, in the model, in the feudal paradigm, you needed a lord of that land. So if they were going to have a single Spanish settlement, one hidalgo, 10 hidalgos, depending on how big the settlement is, might have been enough to govern all of the vassals. But if there were going to be multiple settlements, you were going to need more hidalgos. So when word got back to Spain that Christopher Columbus had found this new land to settle, and that the crown wanted to send hidalgos over there to govern, there were very few blue bloods who were willing to leave the comfort of 16th century Cadiz, Spain, for the tropic frontiers of the New World. There were legends of what was over there. There were legends of lands across the seas. And these legends were partly sailors' tales by the Portuguese, but they were also religious prophecies and so forth. And a lot of these tales, whether they were the sailors' tales or old wives' tales or whatever, mentioned monsters. You can actually find a compendium of monsters that people believed in the 16th century existed over in the New World. And, there were a lot of monsters that existed. There were sharks. The word shark comes from the word Joc, which is X-O-C, which is a tribal language. So, I mean, that's a monster in a sense. And they had other ideas of other monsters, like humanoids with 1 foot that hopped around with one eye like a cyclops, like crazy things. And so they didn't. The Hidalgos, the Blue Bloods, they didn't want to leave their comfortable life for the unknown of the frontier, the tropical frontier on the other side of the world. So the crown had a hard time getting Hidalgos to agree to go over there. So the crown, they came up with this ridiculous idea. This is, I think, the stupidest idea that they had. They went to prisons and they extended offers to lifers in prison, people who were convicted of murder, rape, burglary, whatever. And they said to these hardened lifers, listen, we'll cut you a deal. We are willing to commute your sentence, expunge your criminal record, if you accept noble title and go be land barons in the New World. Like, what lifer in prison is going to say no to that? I mean, of course they said yes to that. So you had two types of Hidalgos. You had, number one, the Blue Bloods, and number two, I like to call it the bloodletters, the criminals. These two groups of people made up the Hidalgos that were sent over to the New World. So when Columbus, wanted the settlers to build their own settlements, you had two groups of people who were unwilling to toil with physical labor. You had the entitled Blue Bloods, and you had the shiftless criminal bloodletters, neither of whom, were willing to do an honest day's work. So they said, no, we're not going to build the settlements. We're not going to get our hands dirty. Make the Tainos do it, enslave them. And Columbus said, oh, no, we're not enslaving these people. No. And that was the source of dissent, constant dissent between Christopher Columbus and the Hidalgos. The Hidalgos hated him for that, especially because, number one, he wasn't Spanish, and they were Spanish, so they looked at him as a foreigner. And number two, he wasn't a nobleman. He wasn't a blue blood. He was the son of weavers. And they were like, why are we listening to this idiot? He has no power over us. We're people of quality. They even wrote that in a letter to the crown. We're people of quality. Who is this guy, telling us what to do? So there's that. That was a constant source of enmity. And so Columbus tried for 8 years to really govern these people, and they were going behind his back, taking slaves against his command. He was taking these slaves back to Europe and having them baptized so that they could be freed, because baptized people could not be enslaved in Christendom. The crown was like, Christopher, you got to stop bringing these enslaved Tainos to Spain. We don't know what to do with them. Like, enough already. Basta, bastante. But Columbus was like, I got to get these people out of there because they're being enslaved. But they were like, no, enough. And he said, well, let's teach them life skills so they can live in Cadiz. Let's teach them how to translate or how to be smiths or how to be whatever, weavers like me or whatever. They did that to some extent, but the crown was only willing to let in so many foreigners. They couldn't. Their economy couldn't support it. Their society couldn't support it. So they said to him, you got to stop that. So there's that, so there was a lot of tension between Columbus and the Hidalgos, and the Hidalgos kept revolting. I think in a previous video I listed all of the revolts and all of the people behind the revolts, and ironically Columbus, he actually quelled the revolts. The fifth revolt was the last revolt. Well, it was also sort of the end of his term, as I'm about to explain. There may have been more revolts had he stayed in office. But anyway, he actually, in the midst of all of these revolts, he kept writing letters to the crown, like, these people, they don't want to listen to me. They ignore what I say. They hate me. They make these false accusations against me. I'm too hard on them, yada, yada. You gotta help me, And he wrote in one of his letters, please send me someone that they will listen to. Meanwhile, the Hidalgos are writing letters to the crown too. Columbus is a jerk. Columbus is a low man, and we're people of quality. We got him over here telling us what to do. He's a foreigner. He's a pauper. And they're complaining about him. Columbus did this. Columbus said that to us. Columbus won't let us do this. Columbus won't let us do that to the Tainos. They would say the Tainos are conquered peoples, and so we, under the encomienda system, we're entitled to enslave them. Columbus won't let us enslave them. And Columbus was writing back, they think that the Tainos are conquered peoples. We did conquer the Taínos. We settled with them. They're our friends. They're not subject to the encomienda system, but they're trying to impose the encomienda system. So the two sides are yelling to the crown about the other side. And Columbus writes in one of his letters, please send me someone that they'll listen to. And so, on a dark day in history, the crown did just that. So, as I said, at the same time, the Reconquista was going on. The Moors, the Islamists, the jihadists had conquered Europe 800, 700 years earlier. And they had enslaved the Europeans. The Moors occupied Spain, and a lot of, actually, the Spanish language itself is a combination of Latin and Arabic. So, the Spaniards, when they finally unified, when Queen Isabella's brother died and left his country to her, and she had two countries, and she married Ferdinand, who had his own country. When these three countries came together to form Spain, it was Aragon, Leon, and Castile. When these three countries came together to form unified Spain, they were finally strong enough to start reclaiming Europe, reconquering Europe. The Reconquista, that's what that word means. So they had that going on, and here comes back from battle the victorious war hero from the Spaniards' point of view, Comendador, that was his title, Comendador Francisco de Bobadilla. Now, Bobadilla was, he was an effective warlord, powerful warlord, was responsible for successful campaigns in the lands of the Moors, kicking them out, reclaiming Spanish territory. So the crown loved him. And the crown, when he marched back from war one day, the crown said, "This is our man. Columbus wants us to send somebody over there that the Hidalgos will listen to. They'll listen to Comendador Francisco de Bobadilla. He's our man." So they said to Bobadilla, look, here's the situation. The Hidalgos are complaining about Columbus. Columbus is complaining about the Hidalgos. Go over there, sort it all out, see what's going on. And if you happen to find that Columbus is the one at fault, just usurp his role. You can be the governor. Just, unseat him with our authority, and you could be the governor. Now, this is not the crown, as you put it, attempting to cancel the rights and privileges granted to Columbus. They weren't attempting to do anything to Columbus because they didn't know what the situation was. They were asking Bobadilla to look into the situation. And if he found that Columbus was at fault, then yes, you could cancel the rights and privileges of his governorship and you become governor. But if you find that it's the Hidalgos at fault and that Columbus is in the right, then tell us that and we'll do something. You figure out, Francisco. You figure out how to keep these Hidalgos in line. The problem with this was, number one, there's a manufacturing defect in this offer to Francisco de Bobadilla. It is inherently flawed from the outset, just like their stupid idea to make criminals, rapists, murderers into Hidalgos. This was another stupid idea. They baked into the offer to Francisco de Bobadilla an incentive for him to find that Christopher Columbus was the one at fault, because that meant Francisco de Bobadilla gets his title, his perpetually hereditary title. So Bobadilla and his son and his grandson and his great-grandson would then be governor of the West Indies. And Bobadilla didn't have to do anything to earn that except say, Christopher Columbus is the one at fault. So naturally, that's what he did. And also, Bobadilla is himself a nobleman. He is himself a blue blood. He's a comendador, okay? He's an hidalgo himself. So, of course, before he even set foot on the land, while he's sailing over on the ships, he's thinking to himself, well, the first thing I'm going to do when I get there is I'm going to arrest Christopher Columbus and his two brothers. I'm going to put them in shackles. I'm going to send them back to Spain. I'm going to take his title. I'm going to claim. Then I'll go around to the Hidalgos. I'll gather up a bunch of men to give me some testimony so we could back this up. If we're ever called to the carpet for it, it'll be perfect. And then, and then I can do whatever I want oh my God, we've got all these slaves over there, the Taínos, we can enslave them. It'll be great. We could take all their gold. It'll be marvelous. If they revolt, we can make examples of them, cut their heads off in the streets like dogs. It'll be marvelous. Let the blood flow. I mean, he's thinking that before he even sets foot on land. And the second he set foot on land, he did exactly all of that. He didn't do any investigation whatsoever. He got off of the ship a a biased magistrate, a biased arbiter. He already knew what he was going to do, and he didn't have to collect any evidence. And he arrested Columbus and his brothers, put them in chains, sent them back to Spain. And while Columbus was on that trip, he undid all of the regulations Columbus had imposed on the Hidalgos, and then anything went. And I mentioned in earlier videos, Bartolomé de las Casas, who was the historian who wrote Historia de las Indias. From what he saw, he was there. He wasn't an historian yet. He was just a settler at the time. He wrote all of this down. He saw it all happen in real time, and he wrote it all down. And he said Columbus was in the right. Columbus was a great governor. I did a whole video on that a few videos ago. And Bobadilla is a liar, and Bobadilla is treacherous, and he's collecting all this false evidence from the recalcitrant Hidalgos. It's all in the record books. So when Columbus got back to Spain, he presented his case to the king and the queen, and he presented his evidence to the king and the queen. And not only did they take the shackles off of Christopher Columbus, the master of the ship wanted to do that on the ride back, but Columbus wouldn't let him. He said only the king and queen gets to take these shackles off. Not only did they take off the shackles, not only did they find all of the calumny, all of the slander against Columbus that Bobadilla charged him with to be nonsense, to be unfounded. They wrote Christopher Columbus a letter of apology for the way Bobadilla had treated him. They unseated Francisco de Bobadilla, and they funded a third voyage for Christopher Columbus. They funded yet another voyage for Christopher Columbus. So, it's one thing to say, well, the evidence doesn't really support these accusations. It's quite another thing to put your Spanish doubloons where your mouth is, and fund another trip back. So, he was completely exonerated, and but at this point, when they said to Columbus, "We're going to unseat Bobadilla. You could be governor again." Columbus said, "No, I don't want the governorship. I'm too tired of dealing with these Hidalgos. They hate me. I'm not a governor. I'm a sailor. I did my best, but get somebody else." But in the meantime, while in that period of time that Bobadilla was running rampant and unleashing his reign of terror, he did all of the horrible things that everybody blames on Columbus. He removed the prohibitions against how the Hidalgos treated the Taínos. He allowed the enslavement of the Taínos. He imposed Bobadilla imposed all of these taxes on the Taínos. And if the Taínos couldn't pay it, Bobadilla would cut their hands off. Bobadilla would sell kings, caciques of tribes to Hidalgos as slaves. Bobadilla would take those chiefs' wives and daughters and other female relatives and sell them as concubines to other Spaniards. Bobadilla was the one who would steal their gold. Bobadilla was the one who murdered them by unleashing dogs on them in the streets and have the dogs tear them apart just for fun. It was Bobadilla who did all that in Columbus's absence. This is what happened when Columbus wasn't there. And the crown knew that. The crown saw that. And that's why they said, you go back, you get rid of Bobadilla and you go back. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. He says, you have to find somebody else who will rule over there justly. And so, since Comendador Francisco de Bobadilla didn't work out, the crown then appointed Comendador Mayor, the great Comendador, Ovando. And Ovando was worse than Bobadilla, or at least just as bad as Bobadilla. Ovando went over there and he did all the same stuff: the murder, the rape, the selling into slavery, all that stuff. And but this time, Columbus was a free man, and he had beaten those charges that Bobadilla levied against him. So Columbus went back over there, and the crown said, "Don't, if you want to go over there a fourth time, fine, we'll fund it, but just stay out of Ovando's way. Don't go over and confront Ovando." And Columbus was like, "Yeah, okay, King and Queen," and he did it anyway because he knew what Ovando was up to, and he was doing everything to bring that to light as well. But when he got to when he finally got to Ovando's court on the fourth voyage, his ships got damaged in a storm, and he had to sit on the island of Jamaica for a long time. And he sent canoemen to Hispaniola for help, and they arrived, in a reasonably quick time. But Ovando didn't want to see Columbus. He didn't want that guy interfering. So he just let Columbus and his crewmen languish on the island for a year. But Columbus eventually made his way back to Hispaniola, and he confronted Ovando in his court. But by that time, the Spaniards had entrenched their feudal system so deeply that Columbus really was powerless to do anything. They just laughed at him. They pretended they couldn't understand him because of his Genoan accent. They just dismissed him. And Columbus, he returned to Spain eventually. There really was little he could do but report all of the atrocities he saw to the king. But by that time, Isabella was dead, and Isabella, I think, really was the one in Columbus's corner. The rest of the Spanish court didn't really care about him. I think probably King Ferdinand was even a little jealous of Columbus because of Isabella's friendliness, perhaps even crush on Columbus. Isabella and Columbus never did anything, but I think that she kind of had a crush on him, and I think Ferdinand knew that. So when he gets back to Spain, he tells Ferdinand what's going on, and Ferdinand could not care less. And Columbus spent the rest of his life just reporting on the things that Ovando was doing, writing letters to the crown and complaining about it. And also, he was talking about, hey, and by the way, I did a lot of this at my own expense, and can I get something for my efforts? And I think Isabella would have said yes, of course, but Ferdinand, because I think he was a little jealous of Columbus, he ignored the letters altogether. Columbus's requests for remuneration for the losses that he sustained, but also his complaints about what Ovando was doing. I think Ferdinand just ignored the letters wholesale. Ultimately, though, there was one, probably the most important part of the story where Columbus won Ferdinand over. He had spent a good deal of time making Ferdinand aware of Ovando's atrocities, which happened in the wake of Bobadilla's atrocities, which happened only because Columbus was absent. And so he finally said to the king, all right, look, if nothing else, if you're not going to remunerate me for all of my financial losses, if you're not going to, send people over there to stop Ovando, at least, Your Majesty, at least issue a proclamation, a royal decree, the first civil rights legislation of the Americas that reads, and I quote, "All the Indians of Hispaniola shall be left free, unharmed and unhindered, and unmolested, permitted to live as a freeman like any other in the kingdom of Castile." And Ferdinand was like, all right, that's not an unreasonable request. Fine, I'll issue a royal decree that says that. And he did. Now, the Hidalgos were so far from Spain that they ignored it, and Columbus eventually died in 1516 of the gout and other natural causes. But young Bartolomé de las Casas, who had lived through the Columbus administration, the 8 years of Columbus's governance in the West Indies, and who was very, very much admired Columbus. At this time, he was no longer a young man. Now he was a friar, and he followed in Columbus's footsteps. He saw that the Hidalgos weren't following the legislation, and so he petitioned the king and said, "Listen, I want another royal decree from you, Your Majesty, sort of a follow-up to Christopher Columbus's civil rights legislation, and what I'd like you to do is issue a royal decree permitting me to start a Franciscan order, and I will be in charge of this Franciscan order, and our purpose will be to travel travel around the archipelago of the Caribbean, and enforcing Christopher Columbus's civil rights legislation, using our religious clout to the extent that we can to shame the Hidalgos in our sermons, calling them out by name, those who are mistreating the Indians, and we want the force of the crown behind us." And so the crown granted that petition, said, okay, all right, fine, go for it. And that finally worked. That was the 1-2 punch. The Christopher Columbus's civil rights legislation was the one punch, and then this order of itinerant friars was the second punch that really brought down the encomienda system in the West Indies. The Hidalgos were publicly shamed in the friars' church sermons, and they stopped disobeying the civil rights legislation, and they stopped enslaving the Taínos or any of the tribal peoples of the Americas. And so slavery came to an end, at least the slavery of the Taínos. And then the Taínos started to intermarry with the Spaniards, and the Latino peoples were born. Thanks to Christopher Columbus. He is really the father of the Latino peoples. Now, a lot of people point out, well, what about the African slave trade? That was a completely different story. It happened at a later time in history. That happened after Christopher Columbus. I'm sorry, I said earlier Christopher Columbus died in 1516. He died in 1506. The African slave trade was what happened in 1516. So 10 years after Columbus was long dead, then some governor in continental Europe signed some sort of a charter for some Spanish settler in the West Indies to transport African slaves there. It had nothing to do with Columbus. So there's that. So no, there was no attempt by the Crown to cancel the rights and privileges granted to Columbus. I mean, all right, I guess that it's to some extent in Columbus's letters to Ferdinand, he was asking for some sort of remuneration, and the king was deaf to it. I mean, maybe that could be considered to be attempting to cancel the rights and privileges, but that's not really an accurate description of what it is. So there was no about face, which is the rest of you. Can you explain for us the real motives behind this about face? There was no about face. Except to the extent that you could say that Isabella was really the one who was Columbus's fan, and Ferdinand was kind of indifferent to at best, and maybe had a little jealousy or animosity to Columbus at worst, and was just kind of deaf to a lot of what Columbus was telling him. But in the end, Ferdinand wasn't deaf. In the end, Columbus won Ferdinand over too. So I guess that's the answer to a very factually incorrectly framed question. So that's enough for this video.